Welcome to Basics of Burping. I'm Chris Traynor. There's a little bit of information about me. I'm a pen tester at Black Hills Information Security. I do some SANS TAing stuff, a handful of certifications, and my Twitter handle down there, CS Trainer, is mostly just replying to things with Star Wars memes and GIFs and such, but hopefully adding a lot better stuff next year. All right, so I promised some people that this will not be a whole wall of slides. This will not be something that we are just talking. I'm going to show you some things, but there are about 10 slides that I want to go through just so that there's something for you to take away after the fact. And as a note, if you pull down the slide deck, and I believe Jason will share where that will be. If you pull down the slide deck, all the way at the end of the slide deck, I included some extra slides around the Pentester TTP talk and webcast I did a while back. And there are slides pertaining to Burp as a tool and what you can do with it. So if you want a little bit more information, you can look there. But we're not going to talk about those. This is basics of burping. So let's get started with that. So what is burping? Right? Burping occurs when excess air travels up the esophagus and is released. I put this in here. Somebody threatened me that if I didn't have at least one thing of actual burping in the presentation, that I would wind up on their chopping block somehow. But I did learn something really interesting. If you are burping too much, there are special exercises you can do. There's a little link from NIH. They've done studies around this to help with that. It can also be an indicator of some serious issues you may have physically. So I guess if you're burping all day, every day, hundreds of times, go to that link, and hopefully I've saved a life. For real though, here's the agenda. We're going to talk through a little bit today, a little bit of what is Burp, its purpose, its setup, dashboard, its target functionality, proxy, repeater, intruder settings. It's a lot to talk through. So we're going to do the best we can, and I'm not going to spend any more time on the agenda. All right. So what is Burp itself? Burp is what's called an interception proxy. It can be used by developers. It can be used by penetration testers. It can be used by anybody, really. But Burp specifically is very well built out. It's very established. There are two versions of it. I'm not going to get very sales pitchy, but there is a free version. There is a paid version. If you're doing penetration testing, or if you want to try to get serious about it, if you're trying to do bug bounty stuff, I think it's at like $450 for a license, which is surprisingly one of the cheaper sides of, I guess, security tools. But it's a phenomenal tool, which is why I wanted to try to do this webcast and kind of share how it works, what it is, and what it tries to do for you. So what we have here inside of the attacker machine, your machine, we have your browser. And normally what would happen is your browser would interact directly with the target web application, sending requests, getting responses. A Burp interception proxy does exactly what it says it does. It intercepts those requests and responses, and allows you to look at them, edit them, manipulate them, be evil with them, and see what happens with your target web application. And then it will forward those requests onto the target web app, and it can intercept those responses coming back. So the purpose of it, a little bit of Rick and Morty in there. What my purpose? You pass butter. Oh my God. So Burp helps you find things. What things? These are two screenshots showing very little of what Burp can actually identify. I just screenshot the issues that they have listed in their tool of what are typically high severity. And I just want to throw them up here for context. There's a lot of high severity things I can help find. Is everything going to be high severity when it pops up? It depends on your web application. Really depends on how you define severity and your risk. But here's it's a little preview of the things you can find. So why we use it, what's its purpose, and it doesn't pass butter. It doesn't get excess air out of you. It actually finds security things. There are several main components of it. I'm going to just throw these up real quick, but I will show you the tool in just a minute. So hang tight. This is just so that we know what's coming. There's a dashboard center for the tool. Largely, honestly, I ignore the dashboard, but it does have your tasks that you're performing, so active passive scanning, some issue activity, which is just a running list of potential vulnerabilities that it has discovered in its interception activities. An event log, which is more just an event log of the tool itself, not an event log of the requests and responses necessarily that you're sending, but an event log of the tool. I'll show you what I mean later. And then there's a huge list of advisories. So you can click on a potential issue and it will show you the details of that advisory, is what they call it. Advisory issues, kind of interchangeable in the Burp world. The next section of Burp is the target. You'll spend a lot of time inside the target tab of Burp. This is where the sitemap, that whole page, that whole tree of your web applications, how it's actually built out. All request response reviews type app in there. This is where you can tie a target web application specifically to just the issues that are discovered for it. This is also where you would define your scope so that you are not being evil to things you should not be evil to. A lot of web apps, they interact with third-party systems to try to make them work and provide functionality. Depending on your engagement, you want to make that as limited as you can to possibly just the domain that you're targeting. And then there are issue definitions that a couple slides ago where I showed 2 pictures of potentially high findings that Burp helps you find. That's where that came from, issue definitions. Proxy is the other tab. It's Proxy inside of Interception Proxy. This is what you do your intercepting. This is where you actually capture those requests that are going to a web server and grab the response that are coming back. Now, remember from the drawing that I put up just a few slides ago, the interception proxy sits between your browser and the web server. It is within your machine, your attacker machine. It is not outside of your machine. There is capability of Burp to interact with a third system, and we'll mention that as I show a little bit of a demo. But the interception proxy itself is something that you run on your own machine. You're basically man-in-the-middling yourself. There's a HTTP history in here, a WebSockets history, and an options. One thing you're going to notice when you get into using Burp is there's a lot of options, like way too many to even memorize. For this purpose, for our purposes today, I'm only going to really show you what proxy listeners are inside of that options tab. The repeater itself as a piece of functionality that Burp created that does exactly what it says. It's kind of self-explanatory. It repeats requests. So as you capture your requests going to a web server, you can replay those manually by sending those requests to the repeater. If you find something that's potentially interesting and might be related to a finding, you would send that to repeater and do some manual replay of that attack. You can also do manipulation, change that request however you want. But it's really good to use the repeater functionality to help verify a finding is a true positive and not a false positive. Again, I know I'm blowing through these slides pretty quick because I want to leave as much time as possible to show you the actual tool. Intruder is another slide or another tab. The Intruder has 4 main areas in it. The definition of positions, basically where your payloads for your attack will go. The payloads themselves and what those payloads may be. A resource pool is a fancy way of saying how hard should we send this attack to the target? Should it be with only 1 request at a time? Can it be 100 requests at a time concurrently? We're going to put some random delays in there. I'll show you all of that as well. And again, there's an options section inside of Intruder specifically for Intruder, and there are a lot of options. The last section that we'll talk about, and I'll show you, is the settings section for Burp. This is actually newly revamped recently. I think it's just in the last month or so. Burp just pushed a new version out where they tried to consolidate the settings for Burp as a whole. But as you saw from the other slides, there's still a lot of options and settings that could be well set in those specific pieces of functionality. There's a lot of sections in here. Again, I'll show you it. But for that, enough slides. right? Let's kind of get to the tool. Let me stop sharing. I'm going to jump over to my VM here. Okay. And Jason, you can jump on and yell at me if you can't see the virtual machine. So what I've done here is this is just a clean Kali install. It has Burp Professional on it. That is the paid version. The quick difference between the paid and the community is free. You can try it out. They do rate limit you a little bit on a lot of that functionality that I just talked about, right? That was not, I just saw in the chat, that was not the default Kali password. It was actually something changed. Good security, right? Anyway, the Burp Pro version, that's that paid version, that's $450 a year. So first thing I'm going to do is Burp Professional. We're just going to open that right up. Real easy setup going on here. Let it spin. There we go. And I was going to have this all open, but I realized there are some steps inside of just opening Burp initially that people not familiar with Burp might want to see. So you know what you're doing, you know what you're seeing. So we're spinning up here. While that's going, I'm going to go ahead and open up the browser as well, so that I have that ready. Extract files. And today, while Burp's starting up, Portswigger, which is the vendor that created Burp, if you're familiar with OWASP and the OWASP Juice Shop, which is an intentionally vulnerable web application, meant to let you mess around with, try to attack, the Gin and Juice Shop is kind of, it's Portswigger's way of a continuation of that, but it's their own version of that web app that is vulnerable, that you can attack to the extent of testing out your Burp pool, to the extent of learning it. I'm not advocating that you go out to this website and actively try to get into their systems and break their stuff. It is meant specifically so that you can test out your tool. And this is what it looks like. And this is what we're going to be using today to walk through some of these pieces of functionality, give you an idea of what they do, how they do it. So in here, starting up Burp, this is a setup piece of things. You can do a temporary project, you can save that project to a disk, or you can open an existing project that you saved before. We're going to go ahead and create our new one. You just hit tab out of name, it kind of dates it there for you to create the file. Moving next, Burp has a lot of default configurations. You do have the ability to customize Burp to do whatever you want, user options, project options, things like that. Those are a little bit beyond what we're going to talk about. So for right now, we're just going to go with the Burp defaults. Yes, yeah, I wish that they offered a cheaper version for people trying to learn cybersecurity. I saw that in the chat. That would be great. I don't think I know that there are some trainings out there that they may have a relationship with, where you can get a trial professional version that expires after 60 or 90 days. I want to say that Sans Sec 542 has that, but then again, you're talking about cheap options, and it's not a cheap option to take the class necessarily. If you have somebody to pay for you, great, do that. So back into it. Here's what I meant by tabs across. This is kind of the default how it opens up. Got dashboard, target, proxy, intruder, repeater. And we're not going to be talking about any of these because that starts to get into more advanced discussion. But and we have the settings way over here at the right. Okay. So like I said, here's the dashboard view of Burp. You can see there's a live passive crawler already on, a live audit from the proxy for all traffic coming in and out of this, in and out of Burp interception proxy. This is by default. Burp is just going to passively analyze what kind of goes through the interception proxy. Down here for the event log, like I said, this is more event logs for the tool itself. Detail, here's the proxy. The proxy was started on local IP there on port 8080. That's the definition. So if you're looking to proxy traffic through that and you forget what port is it on, this is where you can go to check it out. It's always going to state it right there when it starts up. Issue activity, this is blank right now, but we'll start to see things there soon. And advisory down below will show things as well when we get going. I'm showing you how these things work before I do anything, because I wanted you to know that when you open it, nothing's going on. You're not doing anything. You're not proxying anything through this. Yep. Thank you. Somebody shared the Gin and Juice shop URL. Thank you for that. Inside target sitemap, which is blank right now. We haven't viewed any sites. We haven't mapped anything. This is where you would define your scope. And you can use advanced scope, which for you crazy people who like regex, it does have regex capability to use that advanced scope and set a regex value for your scope. Issue definitions, this is where I got those couple screenshots. There are so many, and this isn't even everything, right? This is what Burp will by default find for you or help you find. But there are extensions on the Burp which can add to this list. But it has descriptions, remediations, some links, typical severity. That's all in the issue definitions here. Proxy here, Intercept is off right now. Now, I wanted to specifically clear this up. An interception proxy will intercept the traffic going across. But Burp's default standing is to let all that traffic pass through it. Analyze it as it passes through. If you want to actually stop a request from leaving your system and going to the web server or the web application, you want to hit this button. And that will intercept every request that's going from your browser that you're proxying from. And it will intercept it in here, freeze it in time and space, and let you see it. Decide if you want to forward it on, drop it, take some kind of other action, things like that. But it will default in the off position. There was a time long ago where it defaulted to on, and every time you started doing that, every time you start up Burp, you start doing something. I don't know how many times I got caught where it would freeze the web app, and I was like, something's broken. No, it's because by default it was intercept set to on. HTTP history, again, blank. We haven't browsed anything yet. WebSocket history, we're not really going to talk about that too much, but it is there. And here is the options. Before we get started, and this is why I'm really walking through these tabs as they appear, this is where you saw that proxy listener from the dashboard over here, that local IP at 8080. The definition for that is proxy options, proxy listeners, local IP 8080. Now, I'm going to add another one here because I'm going to be using a different type of browser for some of this. I'm not going to get into the how you set it up to use a different browser, but I'm just going to do it this way because I've got Gin and Juice set up in Firefox right now. So I have two ports listening locally now, 8080 and 9999. Okay. Onto Intruder, again, blank, and repeater will be the same, blank. Now, here's where some magic fun happens. I'm just going to go back over here to the Gin and Juice shop. I have an extension here, Foxy Proxy, which I've configured to be able to turn off and on my proxying from this browser through Burp. So all I'm going to do is turn that on, do a hard refresh on this. Just refresh that page, nothing crazy going on here. And now we start to see this get populated. I like to switch this so that my latest request is on top. That was just that sorting over here with the request numbers. As you can see on the bottom, there's the request that was sent. There's the response. There's an inspector capability over here that allows you to look more closely into different things. So this one here had a URL request parameter. So as query parameters, post ID, value is 3. Sometimes those are URL encoded. Inspector will do its best to try to decode those to human readable format. If we look over here now in target, let's go back to the sitemap. Now we have a gin and juice .shop target has been discovered, right? It did a little bit of passive crawling to see what's there. Not anything that's intense. Mostly just looking for what is passing through the proxy naturally and identifying certain things. So right off the bat, we know that strict transport security is not being enforced on this. You look here, it starts to list out the affected URLs as well. I'm moving things around here so that you can visually see with a high enough font, but hopefully moving in stuff around, just resizing these quadrants of Burp doesn't throw you off too much. Remember, we just looked at the issue descriptions, these issue definitions. This is where they come into play. We found strict transport security not enforced. The issue definition is now displayed to us with the path, with the host, its typical severity, and how confident Burp is within it. I'll show you this real quick. You can set the severity and you can set the confidence yourself. The values that Burp gives are the default, right? It is what Burp assumes is severe. If you work at an organization or you're pen testing an organization that the most important thing they do is implement security headers, and that's in the development guidelines and practice, this may not be a low severity finding for you. It may be a medium. It may be a high. You might be difficult to argue that it's a high because it's just a security header, but you can change those values. And the confidences there are certain, firm, and tentative. If you change those, the reason I really call this out, you change them and you change your mind, you don't remember what it was before, restore to original value. They've kind of thought that path through. So down here in this bottom right-hand quadrant, to go a little bit further, you have your issue description, you have your issue remediation, so the references, and vulnerability classifications. This is great for helping you build a report. It's great for if there's a finding, you don't really know what to do with it, you've never seen it before, some of those links can really help. To go further into what that finding can, or that issue, so it'll trip you up maybe sometimes. It's issues up here in the top right. They call it an advisory down here. I don't know why they use different terms. They do. If you draw the line in your brain, they're the same thing. So you're wondering now, what did the request and response look like to get this potential issue? There it is. There's a request, and there's a response to it. Same thing that we saw on the Proxy tab. The Inspector tab is equal here as well. It'll only show for whichever one you're in, or whichever URL you're looking at, whichever advisory. So that can help you out. Now you may be a little bit confused because I've been focusing on this right-hand pane in the bottom, but there's a request and response here too on the left. That's weird. Draw a mental line straight down here. This divider. Issues to this, issues in the top right will show you things in the bottom right. Things here, the contents, is when you're navigating inside of here. If I switch to be in the posts, notice how the contents got less, but the issues also got less. And if I click this URL inside, notice how the requests change. So it's showing you different things here. All right. You may get a My Account URL that doesn't have any issues, but they still want to show you that from my account, this is what the request response. This is kind of how you're trying to look. And I believe it's grayed out because you didn't actually navigate to that URL yet. So there is no response. It didn't actually issue a hard request. It's just there, ready for you to do so. So let's try that real quick, and we'll see how that fills out. You can see how these values change, just to illustrate the purpose. So now I've gone back into my browser. I went to my account. It redirected me here to log in. I'm going to go back to Burp. Now that value has a little blue dot, which means there's some kind of findings. The blue dot will say it'll change to orange, it'll change to red. It's basically reflecting what the highest severity issue is for that area in your application, for that age tree, that sitemap. So now we have my request, my response isn't there yet. There we go. Clicked it again. Now it's built out that response because the request has actually gone through with all the cookies, all the headers, and everything that's in there. And you notice we click here, our issues got narrowed down. I'm going to click at the very top level. All those issues come back. And listed within this pane right here, still got my account. I'm pointing this out in this middle pane here because notice if I select the different URLs in here, nothing changes on the right side. What's driving the issue list is this left-hand pane. I click resources, the issues change, the contents change. Good. Now, going back, we're kind of going backwards in order here. This is what our dashboard looks like now. Where did all those findings come from, those potential vulnerabilities, those potential issues that we now will have to discover or validate? In the dashboard here, we said when we started back up, 2 things by default came up for Burp. A live passive crawl, which added items to the sitemap, and a live audit of the proxy traffic. 11 low issues, 26 informational. If you want to see what those are really doing, the live audit will give you the ability to do a view details. It's going to look like this. Nothing much on this details page, right? It's kind of weird. It's details, but it doesn't really show you many details besides the scan type, scope, and such. Here's the audit items that was impacted by this passive, I want to highlight that, passive scan, passive auditing of what we've done manually in the application. Those are the items that audited. Here's a list of issues just running. This is kind of messy to look at, which is why the other tabs, like the target tab, is probably where you want to spend your time when you get to validating or verifying your findings. There's an event log and a logger as well in here, but there's no traffic going through it right now. Let's close that out. I remember I started up a second local proxy. That's what this now second line in the event log is. It's kind of strange. You'll get used to jumping around between these tabs. If you get into Burp, you're going to become very familiar. Again, this is kind of basics of Burp, showing you what it does, where things are. This is being recorded, so if you're not getting something right away as I say it, this will be up, in a matter of a couple of days. You go back and look at it and re-listen to it. But now, if we're looking in the issue activity, again, still in that dashboard section, we start seeing that familiar advisory request response that we saw over here. Now, this is a running list, as I mentioned. This is a running list from 1 first issue it ever found, all the way up to 37. It's kind of messy. If you go into that target, it collects it by the type of issue. It's a little easier to kind of page through. And you might be asking yourself, for target, one of the main things is scope, right? We want to make sure that we have a defined scope. We're staying within the bounds of our engagement, ethically and with permission, bounds within our engagement. There's a scope here, but nothing is set. You can right-click from almost anywhere inside of Burp. If it has a URL, you can right-click it and say Add to Scope. A little warning will pop up here now, and it will say, you've put something in scope. Do you want to stop capturing everything that's outside of that scope going forward? I'm going to click No, just because there's no purpose for this in demo. But now I jump to the scope, it's there. You imagine that's a hard URL. It's a hard base URL that's going on there. If you did advanced scope control and set the scope, it's now regex. You can do all sorts of editing and manipulation with this. Typically what I do is I go in here, I select any, I take out that port because now it'll be HTTP or HTTPS. And I'm terrible with regex in my memory. I have notes on this stuff, but I did not bring them with me. But it might be asterisks to capture everything that's before gin and juice. So if you have any subdomains that pop up, it'll capture that and just hit OK. For me, I'm going to remove all scoped item from that and just leave gin and juice. Now, why is this valuable? I'll show you. Only gin and juice shop is right there. I'm going to just go to google.com. Still proxying through. So everything happening in this browser is going through. Now I've got a few more things, and Google's real chatty. We've got something going out to Mozilla. We've got several Google subdomains happening here. If you are using a web application or you're using this Burp with a web application that does a lot of reaching out to other URLs, this can get messy real fast and can get hard to focus on what you're doing and where you should pay attention to. Right here, this is one of the bones I have for Burp. They do a lot. Portswigger has built an amazing tool. I wish this right here, where my mouse is going across, was a little bit more visually called out. Because if you click it, that's actually where you filter things. You can say, show only the in-scope items here. You can filter status codes, different folders, file extensions, search through everything. I'm going to apply. Watch right here in that leftmost pane when I hit apply. Boom, it's all gone. Don't care about it. It's all out of scope for me. I only want to focus what's in scope. This same thing happens in the proxy. And the reason I call it out is because all of these Google requests and responses are still here, still being shown, right? That's because there's another bar here to filter. Show only my in-scope items. Boom, for requests. You can filter out a lot of that noise and focus only on what you want to focus on. Okay? And again, the same sort of filter options you have here, different status codes, different file types, things like that, to really help you focus on what you should be focused on at the time. Now, I haven't talked at all about Intruder or Repeater yet, and I'm going to get to that right after I look at this settings. There's not much we're going to show in here. I just wanted to show you where it was and what it does. Settings all the way over here on the right. This is where you can change all sorts of things. About the project, about the tools, collaborator, which gets into a little bit more advanced usage, but we're going to see an instance of it in just a minute. Automatic backup to save your project. How you handle your sessions. One thing that I wanted to bring this up specifically for is for network and connections. I struggled with this as an internal pen tester working within an organization for a while. One of the options inside of settings, network, and connections is to establish an upstream proxy. If you are inside of a corporate environment and it requires you to go through a proxy server to get out of your network, you're going to want to add it here inside of your proxy servers, upstream proxy servers. Calling that out because I know a lot of people here are in that situation, and it'll be the same thing. You add it. Which destination hosts do you want to go through that proxy? You can simply hit an asterisk. We'll match anything. Proxy host, proxy port, what sort of authentication type, if any, different domains, different domain host name. Now that that's out there recorded, the only thing I wanted to show you in settings for basics, if you are within an organization and you're dealing with that fight, that can be hard. So now you know where it is. Now you can work with it, right? So we get back here. We're back in our proxy tab where we spend most of our time when we're actively testing. Targets where we do verification and validation. Proxy is where we're seeing traffic go as it comes. We're going to close out Google here. I'm going to take away that login, but I'm not going to press enter just yet. Request number 10, I'm going to go back to the intercept. Here's where we're really going to intercept traffic in real time on the fly. I believe I have to go. I'm just checking in options here to make sure I actually intercept scope. There is a URL, it's in target scope option here for intercepting requests. Setting something here because I wanted to actually. This is basically telling Burp that if it's in the target scope, I want you to grab it. This is for the active interception. This is not for passively passing stuff through. This is for I'm going to grab that request before it leaves my machine, after it leaves the browser, before it goes out to the internet and go to that web server. I'm grabbing it, stopping it dead, and I'm going to look at it. I basically just set here to say, if it's in the target scope, grab it. And for the responses, if the request was intercepted, then stop the request as it comes back through. Stop the response as it comes back through. Under the intercept here, I've hit intercept on. Back in our browser, I hit enter. I didn't just bring Burp up. It did it on its own. I don't know why this font is smaller than the rest of everything here. I'm sorry about that if it's a little difficult to see, read. I tried to up the font size. But what it just did was, notice this right over here in the gin and juice shop, still spinning, trying to load. Nothing's changed on the page because it stopped that response dead. Now I can see what it is. I can choose to drop that request or forward it on. For this purpose, I'm just going to forward it on. Here's the response that came back. It stopped it as it was going out, and it stopped it as it was coming back in. So I've intercepted the response before my browser has ever had a chance to see anything else, anything new. I'm going to choose to forward this along to the web browser. Now it's reloaded. We're back on the main page of that. The reason this is important to call out for this interception is not for typical browsing and trying to get used to the functionality. You want to do this sort of interception when you are honing in to understand the order that a web app does certain requests and what order the web server responds back to you. Some logins for web applications, they're straightforward, they're easy. It's a request out, it's a response back. You get maybe one or two requests out of it. I've seen web applications where you hit the login button and it makes 6 different requests. 4 of them are redirects, and 2 of them set different cookies and wipe the old ones out. This will help you step through that as you do that work. Let's just see here. Let's turn the intercept off now. Back to HTTP history. Remember, we started that whole little side description of the intercept, the active intercept, with request number 10. Now I'm on request 58. That was the one I intercepted. If you made a change to the request as it went out the door, a little checkbox would appear here under edited, so you can keep track of what's edited and what's not. Now, I'm going to jump over, show you a list here. Put your scanner to the test. This is that description I was talking about from Portswigger. It's a deliberately vulnerable web application designed for testing web vulnerability scanners, which they want you to try it with Burp. If you click on that little link, it'll bring you here. There's login details they give you to be able to log into the application. But here we have a bunch of URLs and a bunch of vulnerabilities that you can try to find using Burp or any other interception proxy that you want. OWASP has a free one called Zap. It's good if you're doing this as your day job. I highly recommend the paid version of Burp. It's more built out, it's more polished. It's well supported. But here we can see different values coming in here, different URL destinations, and what the vulnerability should be on those pages. I'm going to look for, let's see. Got some examples here. I'm going to try to use one that does an example. This filter one here. let's go to that URL. And I'm just going to open a new tab. And put that URL in there just so we can demonstrate some of those other pieces of functionality that I was going to talk about. So we've got the catalog filter URL is loaded here. Go back to our target. We now have catalog, filter. All these things are underneath of there. All right, so we built out that page tree, that sitemap a little bit more. The proxy is showing catalog filter. Everything's still working very nicely. If I go to view details on one of these, see the URL changes here, right? We went somewhere the URL typically changes in a lot of web application. I'm going to look for this particular URL. Let me go back in here, product right there. It's got parameters, URL parameters. This is exactly what we saw. I'm going to right click inside of the request section, and there's send to repeater, send to intruder. I'm going to send it to repeater. Now I can replay that request as many times as I want. I can change any of these values. One of the things that you will use repeater for is to find out what the minimum requests is that you can send. I just took out all the cookies. Web app still accepts it. I'm going to take out all the headers. Web app still accepts it, gives a good response back. The reason I showed you this is if you are trying to build an attack path where you're trying to automate requests, do this first. It'll make those requests in Python or whatever language that you're building, that you're scripting it out, much, much easier. And you have a little ability to jump back in these backwards and forwards things here. You can see the response sort of changing, the requests changing from how I replayed those. I'm going to go all the way back to the beginning one. I'm going to send it to Intruder. Actually, first, I'm going to try to do scan. This is to do an active scan. I'm just going to try to show you something. This is going to run while I do something else. I'm going to choose audit coverage maximum, scan details. There's the URL. A resource pool, nothing crazy. And I'm just going to click OK. What that did before I jump over to Intruder is it added a task down here, back on the dashboard, running right now. As we're doing this, I'm going to let that do its thing and hope that I'm not going to have to sacrifice to the live demo gods and it finds what I found at 11 o'clock last night to show you. Well, for now, we're back in repeater. While that scan run, that task execute, I'm going to now send this request to Intruder. You can do this straight from Proxy too. Right click on any of these requests. You get most of these options. I'm going to send to Intruder. See how it highlights a little bit right there? I'll jump there. Intruder is where you can manually set your attacks. Basically, what Burp did, or what Portswigger did, was Intruder was the original way to attack systems. I found a request, something's bad about it. Let me try to manually set my attack type and my payloads, fire it off, and then do a manual analysis. That was a while back. Now they've come with that scanning option that I just did. By hit scan, do a maximum audit of that URL, that request, see what I can get. That helps automate a lot of this. But this is basically what's going on in that scan. We're now in Intruder. We've got that request for the product ID. This, the positions, there are 4 different types of attack types here. Not going to get into exactly which ones they are, because for now, we're only worried about demonstrating what it does, not all the different ways it does the magical things. These little squiggly lines, little squiggly characters here, next to each one of these, I'll clear them out so you can see it disappear. Now this is just a regular request. If I highlight that one and I click add, it puts these little characters on the right and left and right of that. That's defining a position that we're going to have Burp inject a payload value into and then attack this URL with those payloads. Our payload here, where we set it, All these don't really matter. Your payload sets, you get a little more complicated with these things. But Burp Pro comes with a awesome curated list of different things you can choose. Pre-built lists, quick fuzzing, full usernames, come passwords, 0 to 9, so numeric values. For this purposes, just to demonstrate, I'm going to go all the way down here to fuzzing and SQL injection, because the URL sort of looks like it might be doing a query to a database with a value, product ID 1. Now, as a side note, anybody familiar with IDOR, indirect, insecure, direct object reference, or something like that? Using a 1 as your product ID, probably not a great idea. That would probably be a finding in a test. But let's just try this payloads of SQL injection. Resource pool, default is 10 concurrent requests. You can set new ones down here where you can do fixed or random variations of milliseconds between requests. Call that out, because if you need to be a little evasive or a little bit of a softer touch with the web application, you can mess with that. For now, we're going to leave it as a default, fire it off just to see what it looks like when it's done. Options, again, Burp has so many options, so many ways to customize all this stuff. We're going to leave it all as default. Come back to here, hit start attack. A new window is going to pop up. 166 payloads were just issued to the web server in 3 seconds, something like that, very quick. We get all of our statuses. Let me make this real big. Our statuses of those payloads. Again, we have a filter up here. You can filter things out. If you want to only see things, if you want to ignore all the 400 responses, it's ignored. Drop those back in just for illustration. You can sort all these. You can see the requests and response of whichever one you select. See that product ID value changes to match the payload that was used. It's URL encoded here. Now, something that you may notice here, we didn't find anything. Wasn't supposed to find anything right now. This was just supposed to show you how you get to Intruder, set something up, fire it off. If we were successful, you may see different lengths here. Looks like all of these lengths are the same. All the statuses are the same. They're all bad requests. Let's check out one of the responses. Bad request, invalid product ID. So that's good. As a note, request 0 is your baseline. That's what you started with. Okay. You always start, it fires off what the request was without any manipulation, without any changes. Let me close out of this Intruder right now. I'm going to discard it. Let's go back to dashboard. Still firing off some requests. I don't think we're going to have the time to capture what I was hoping to capture. But here's the details of it, of what we set up for that scan. Audit items, all the URLs we send to it. You can select multiple, you can select one. Issue activities. Here's the different issues that it did find. And you see the advisory request and response specific to it. Event log is just audit started. And this is an actual logger showing everything it sent. It has a default to only capture a certain limit. If you want to capture everything, you're going to have to bump those defaults up. What we're really looking at is we found some new issues to check. Now we're coming up right to 10 minutes left. We talked about the dashboard, the target, the proxy, a little bit about the intruder, repeater, and settings. Those are basics. There's a lot to learn here. As the final thing I want to mention about Burp before we switch over and try to answer maybe some questions. Inside of Proxy, inside of Intercept, subtab, there was this button I didn't talk about. If you don't know how to set up a separate browser or not familiar with how to import a certificate authority to your browser to be able to proxy through Burp, which gets a little bit more complicated than I want to talk to now. Burp added this built-in browser that if you click it, it will open up a Chromium web browser that is automatically configured to proxy through Burp. You do nothing. You enter the URL in here or google.com, it's going to proxy through and it will work all that traffic going through. You do not have to change anything, do any setup. You can really get up and running from a basic perspective. All right. I'm going to jump back over my slides just for a minute. If you have questions, ask them. Jason, I don't know if you've been capturing any of the questions. Everything's been really flying by on the Discord off to the left from me, so I haven't noticed too many. But if we have any, jump on now. Let me know.
Yeah. So if you want to ask a question, now would be a good time to throw out a brand new one. We've been answering questions in the back end, and so most of the questions have been answered at this point. So where do people download Burp in case they joined late?
Yep. So you want to go to Portswigger, which I have another slide for, perhaps. Actually, I do not. It's portswigger.net, I believe, for your Burp interception proxy. You'll be able to download the free community version from there. If not, yeah, here we go. If you want to get there via Twitter, burp_suite under the Twitter handle. That's their Twitter handle. I put a second one in there for mastering Burp. If you join this webcast and you have used Burp before and you want some other tips and tricks, the Mastering Burp Twitter account puts out some really good things, little quick blurbs. If you're looking to continue learning on this, of course, Black Hills YouTube channel blog, we have some mentions and some stuff about it. There's the Black Hills Cyber Range. I throw that out there, not as a sales pitch, but we do have challenges on there that you use Burp to solve. Again, there's the links for the vulnerable web applications that I mentioned. DVW is I don't know how PG we're going to keep the webcast, so I'm not going to spell it out, but you can just go to that link. If you're advanced and you want to learn more, down at the bottom, Tim Tomes at Landmaster53, he has an advanced, I highlight this, advanced Burp tactics. I used Burp for years. I went to that training. I learned more things that I never knew were possible. All right, let's see what other types of questions here. What type of modules outside of the standard Burp ones that I like to use? In the slide deck, when you pull that down, all the way at the end of it, you're going to see, I mentioned at the beginning, some extra slides. Some of those talk about a couple of the Burp extensions that can add capability onto Burp. Those are a couple of my favorites, how to use it and how to use some of the things we just talked about as well. Let's say Retire.js is a good Burp extension. Authorize is a good Burp extension. Let me jump back over my things. We got XF Tool Scanner is real good. JSON Web Tokens, another real good one. If you want SQL injection, there is an integration for SQL map called SQL IPy. That's really great. But those are just a few kind of off the top of my head. Let's see. I'm scrolling back at 2 questions. Yep, go for it. I got a
question for you. Are you planning to do a class on this?
It's very, very interesting. So those are resources for continued learning on that side. Let me jump to the next one. So if you're not sick of my voice yet, jumped a little too far. If you're not sick of my voice yet, I am planning on putting together a intro to offensive tooling class. The first run of that is going to be March 2nd of next year. It's going to be real short, 4 hours. It's going to be at a virtual event that Black Hills and Anti-Siphon is putting on. The Anti-Siphon Summit for 2023 is the title, the most offensive con that ever offensived. I said that right, Jason.
Yeah, it's good.
Yeah. So I'll talk about Burp again during that class. I'll get a little bit more into things. I'm actually going to recommend that this webcast be like prerequisite viewing for people attending that so that we're not starting from scratch. But I also talked about Burp a lot in Pentesting TTP's webcast I did a while ago. Links are there as well.
And before we wrap today, I want to thank all of our friends at Black Hills who are currently answering questions on the back end. So those of you that are asking questions through Zoom, we got BB King and others that are answering your questions that way. So Ashley, thank you for doing that. In the Discord, and in Zoom. So thank you to our friends for doing that. All right, Chris. When using VPN/Cloudflare DDoS protection, will that influence on Burp's functionality?
It shouldn't influence Burp's functionality, depending on your VPN that you have set up. It should still tunnel everything through that VPN just fine. It's going to act like it's basically like a module in front of your web browser, and your VPN should just accept that traffic perfectly fine. When you're talking about defensive measures that certain web applications or companies have in place that may say, I fired off 166 requests in about 3 seconds in that demo, if they see that as a bad operation, they may block me, which is where we get into some of those advanced options of saying, vary the request timing, only do 1 or 2 concurrent requests at a time. Make it random in how often you send things. It'll slow down our scanning and our activities, but you can do a little bit of evasiveness from there. There are other more advanced tactics to get around really lock down defensive measures that are put in place, but Burp shouldn't be impacted by those.
All right, Chris, we're going to wrap up there. We're going to just spend just a minute or two to say, hey, thank you so much. We got a chance to to do this. Chris, do you have any final words before I thank everyone for attending?
No, thanks everybody again for attending. Thanks Black Hills team and people answering, especially, we've got some very good specialists out there on our team that I'm sure have answered questions probably even better than I was able to describe them. So again, thanks Jason, thanks Ryan, thanks team, thanks everyone for attending.
And once again, thank you so much for being a part of the community that we're bringing together to help share our knowledge and help share your knowledge with each other. It's been a great 2022. I said in the pre-show banter that over 52,000 people have cumulatively joined us for webcasts. And that means some people may have attended 20 times, some people maybe 3 times, some people 1 time, but collectively it was over 52,000 people in 2022. So thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for being a part of this community. You can stick around Discord. You can share your knowledge with others. We love that. And so please join the Black Hills InfoSec Discord server. In 2023, we'll be back every single Thursday for another live stream or webcast or whatever. So I would encourage you to join Serena's Twitch and YouTube channels. I dropped the link inside the chat here inside Zoom. It's also inside of Discord. And so she's showing up on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and she's just walking through CTF. She's walking through the things that she knows, and she's teaching others. On Mondays, we do the news, so make sure to stop by and see us on the news. On Tuesdays, we do a live stream from Anti-Siphon. On Wednesday, we do a live stream from Anti-Siphon. Here's the point. We like you, and we want you to get better at what you do. And we want you to become heroes at where you work. And so that way you can say, I know these things, I can do these things, I'm capable of these things. And so that you can improve your life, which improves all of our lives, because security is all of our job. And so thank you for joining us in 2022. We hope to see you in 2023. That's it for now. Ryan, kill it with fire. Bye-bye.